from the, here we go, we're recording, that comes from the materials we'll be looking at today. And so for this type of activity, it's called an open middle. Your task is to fill in the blanks that are the squares with digits. And so you're going to be making two 3-digit numbers. And then you want to try to make the smallest possible answer. So you're going to have a 400 something minus 100 something, make the smallest possible answer. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. You can put your responses in the chat. Yes, you can repeat digits. Mm-hmm. So when I do this activity with teachers, typically a lot of people get right to the optimum, smallest possible result very quickly. With students, it usually takes quite a bit longer. But one of the things that I love about this type of math routine, and we'll be looking at a couple different, we'll talk a little bit about why math routines are so helpful with this beginning level class and this beginning level of math, is that you can do them again with just slight variations. So after I ask folks to make the smallest possible answer, I would next ask you to make the largest possible answer. So you can take a moment to do that because I know it's going to be pretty quick for most people. Okay. Great. There's a lot of other versions you can do of this. For example, the original version of this open middle problem actually asked people to make the answer closer to 200 than 300, so it got even a little more complex. But the power of this math routine is that you can do it multiple times and make these variations, and I always do them more than once. What do you think students might get out of an activity like this? And feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. What's the benefit of this type of activity? Okay. So I see Danielle said options, interactive, students gain math sense, challenging, interesting, gain confidence, critical thinking, problem solving, engages their brain, encourages discussion. Good. Teaching concepts, thinking about number, size, or value. Great. So a lot of the things people are mentioning, these make me think more of the standards of mathematical practice. Not only the content we want students to learn, but also the way we want them to learn to approach mathematics, that we want them to, for example, make sense of problems and persevere, right? Because in most cases, students trying to solve an open middle problem are not going to get to that optimum answer right away. So they're going to have to try stuff. And there isn't an obvious place for them to start. So they're going to have to think about how they could make sense of this and how they could come up with a solution. In terms of the content, these particular examples I pulled from the unit operation sense, where there's a lot of focus on place value. There's a focus on the meaning of subtraction. So helping students to understand what happens to a difference when we change the different parts of the subtraction, right? Because many students will automatically think that, you know, both numbers need to be as big as possible to get that biggest possible answer, but that doesn't actually work out. So it's a little bit counterintuitive for them at first. All right, great. Well, I wanted to start you with a little bit of math because we will be doing a little bit more talking at the beginning, but you'll have the opportunity today to do a few more math activities that come from the unit, the BeCALM unit that we're going to be talking about. So my name is Melissa Braaten. I am here. I work as a curriculum developer and PD consultant with the Adult Numeracy Center at TERC, which is located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I've also been teaching adult numeracy in Boston, Massachusetts, for the last 15 years. So we're going to be talking today about teaching beginning math learners with BeCALM. I want to point out right away that BeCALM is, well, it's an acronym, obviously, like everything in adult education, but this curriculum is freely available for download. So everything we're going to be talking about today, there is a website where you can download all the materials, all the teacher, all the student packets, everything. Okay, so this isn't something you have to buy. It's a whole set of materials that are available to anyone in any state. And I will show you a little bit more about the website later, but Mark, do you mind putting that in the chat right now just to make sure everybody has that? Okay, so it has its own website, but it's all free. So, and I also want to point out, I know that right now you folks are attending a language and literacy conference, and this is a topic about math, and we're going to be looking at a curriculum that was designed as a curriculum for a math classroom. However, all the materials, you may find that there's pieces of it that would really complement some of the things you might be doing in your language class or in a reading class if you're trying to add more contextualized materials. So just wanted to make you aware of that as well. All right, so BeCALM stands for Beginning Curriculum for Adults Learning Math. In Massachusetts, we also previously, we still have a curriculum called CALM, and I know there's been some CALM trainings in Minnesota as well, so some of you may be familiar with that. But CALM was designed to be a very complete adult ed curriculum to get students all the way up to being college and career ready, based on the college and career readiness standards. What we found after, CALM was out for a couple of years, while CALM does address some of the math standards at the earlier levels, it was often done as a review. But the reality in adult education is that we always have students and sometimes even whole classes that really need more than a review of those beginning level skills and concepts. So that was the reason that we developed BeCALM, was to make sure we had something that was developed to meet the needs of those students who needed the time and intensity and the practice to actually learn those things for the first time. They didn't just need a quick review. So when we're talking about beginning level math, we're looking at students who need instruction at math that is grade level equivalent of 2 to 4 in the college and career readiness for adult education. That's basically level B, although there are some standards from level C as well that are in that 4th grade band. These materials that we're going to be looking at, they were all designed, with the exception of one packet, they were all designed to be remote ready, which means they could be facilitated in a fully remote classroom. They can, of course, also be done in an in-person classroom. So we wanted to make them as widely usable as possible. And we do have packets available in all the different domains that cover fully all the math at this beginning level. So there's geometry, number sense, operation sense, multiplication concepts, division concepts, measurement and data, and benchmark fractions. So each of those has its own set of materials. And you'll be getting a little overview of both what is the math content at this level and a little bit of a look at the scope and sequence of this curriculum, just so you know what's out there. The other thing we're going to be reflecting on as you get to try out some of the activities from BeCALM today is that BeCALM was designed to approach teaching math at the beginning level by honoring and centering student thinking. And the way that it does that is exploring multiple ways of solving a problem, developing conceptual understanding of basic operations and other beginning math content, and lastly, providing applications to relevant adult contexts. Okay? So as we go through and look at different activities, I'm going to ask you to reflect on how do you see this approach in some of these specific examples. Okay. Our objectives for today is that you'll be able to identify the level of students and content that BeCALM was designed to support, that you'll become familiar with the scope, the sequence, and the structure of the BeCALM units, and experience a sampling of activities from the units to illustrate how BeCALM centers student thinking. Okay, so that's our plan. We'll start by talking about who this is for and what is beginning level math. Then we'll look at the scope and sequence and structure, and then do the activities. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this curriculum was designed to support beginner level students who need the opportunity to learn the math at this level. And in many cases, adult students who come in needing instruction at this level, they may have had limited access to education in the past. Or what is also very common is we have adults who have learning disabilities of some sort. They may be aware of it, they may not. But there's often some reason why they struggled in the past with this type of material and why they may still be struggling with it now. I am curious, so I can see we've got, over 30 people. Is there a way, I know we don't have your videos on, but can you still raise a hand so I can just kind of get a sense? I'm curious how many people think that you have students in your classes who probably need instruction at this level of math. Okay, I see a number of hands, a number of thumbs ups. Okay. Yeah. Depending on your program, you may not have an entire class, dedicated to this level. You may or you may not. But in most programs, you're probably going to have a few students where you might have recognized, oh, this person, maybe doesn't understand some of these more beginner level math. Great. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so, as we're going through and looking at these materials, I want you to think about how you could possibly, what would be useful for you in your particular teaching situation, what pieces might be helpful. The thing I do want to keep in mind, whenever you're working with beginning math learners, is that learning these concepts takes time. Even though we consider the concepts we're going to be looking at as, beginning, as early level content, it doesn't mean that they're not cognitively rich. It doesn't mean they're not complex. It doesn't mean they're not hard to learn. And especially for folks who have learning challenges, it can take even longer. So just want to keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about, oh, maybe this activity would go well in what I'm doing. There are some things you may want to do as an opportunity to expose people to different math concepts, but somebody who didn't understand multiplication before is not going to understand multiplication after just a couple activities. These are pretty extensive units to really build math understanding. So I guess what I wanted to point out that if you're not a math teacher and you don't have a math class, you can still use a lot of the materials here, but you have to be realistic about what kind of outcomes you're going to get, right? You're not going to be able to do one math activity and suddenly everybody understands multiplication. That's just not a reasonable expectation for someone to put on a language or literacy teacher. However, you may find some really great stuff that could complement what you're already doing. Now, when I'm working with folks at the beginning level, it's really common for adults whose math skills are at this level to feel that their math skills are not where they think they should be. They often have past experiences that may have been negative. They may have math anxiety. It's really important for me that their experience in my class helps them to improve their understanding of themselves as a math learner. And part of how we do that is by helping students be successful at things that are cognitively challenging, right? It may be that they've never really persevered through a problem like that open middle problem before. But when they experience success at something that really makes them problem solve, that can help change people's self-perception. It's also important for folks at this beginning level to show them how the math relates to things they can use right now in their lives. Even though many of these students may have goals of, going on to get a high school equivalency or go to college, that's going to just be a longer term goal for somebody whose math skills are at this beginning level right now. So to support them in their perseverance and also just to support them as human beings, we want to show, yeah, what you're doing right now can help you in your life. And here's the ways that you might use it. And lastly, because many of these folks do want to continue on with their math, we want to build that solid foundation so that when they do move on, they're going to be successful at higher levels of math as well. So what I want to give you a chance to look at, so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about beginning level math, there is a crosswalk handout, and Mark's going to put a link to the Google Doc in the chat. But I'm going to give you a couple minutes to just kind of skim through this handout. It's going to list college and career readiness math standards, and it's also going to list things that are addressed in BeCALM. So it goes in both directions. My goal for you is don't read it in all its detail, but skim through it and then try to summarize what is the math content at the beginning level. Like what's there if you had to just put it in, one sentence or and then also when you think about that math content, how do adults use that math content in their daily lives? Okay. So you should be able to access the crosswalk. I can see the link in the chat. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes of quiet, but please feel free to ask questions or to comment or to put your summary in the chat box when you're ready. If you have any trouble accessing the document, please let us know and Mark can help with that. Oh, thank you, Mark. Mark also put the questions from the slide in the chat box. I'm going to give you folks a couple more minutes, but I'm going to ask you to start summarizing what you've seen so far in terms of what type of math is included at this early level. All right, so some of the things I'm seeing people mention in the chat are things like basic numeracy skills, estimation, mental math. There's also a lot about the basic operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, estimating. Someone mentioned whole numbers, right? So apart from, there is one unit that's introducing benchmark fractions. Apart from that, most of the focus is on whole numbers in the entire beginning level curriculum. And when it comes to fractions, decimals, and percents, it only goes to halves and quarters. So really, we're mostly talking about whole numbers here. Applying ability to do mental math, foundational understanding of numbers. Okay. When it comes to the things that people are mentioning about how adults use it, I see a lot of people mentioning things like paychecks, like grocery stores, so things like shopping, consumer skills, estimating finances. Ooh, someone also mentioned place value. Place value is a really important topic at the beginning level. Real life money. Measurement. So a couple people mentioned different kinds of measurement skills and how those might come up in either consumer skills or, you know, doing things in your household. Absolutely. Great. Okay. So the reason I wanted to give you folks a chance to look at that is to really see what we mean when we're talking about beginning level skills. And we're talking about adults who need to understand these things better, right? Not a quick review, but like maybe they don't fully understand what multiplication looks like in the real world or how it works. Or maybe they don't have a good understanding of when they would use division or what division really does, or even how it's connected to multiplication, right? So sometimes when we have adults come and say, oh, you know, I'm so bad at math, I need a beginning class, you know, they're thinking about like that they didn't do well in 10th grade algebra or something, but that's not the level of math we're talking about here, okay? And we can also see in the things that people mention, like this is the kind of math that adults are called on to use all the time. So it's not difficult to find ways to apply it, but it also means that for folks who may struggle with this level of math or not have a good understanding, there's a lot of activities in their daily lives that they may be avoiding, or they may be relying on other people to do it. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity there for people to find real value in this. I'm going to have, and you know, you will have access to all these documents at any time you want because they're all on the BeCALM website as well. But I'm next going to have Mark put in the chat box a link to the scope and sequence document. All right, so there it is. The scope and sequence describes how the different packets or the different topics are ordered or not. And you're also going to see the types of applications for each packet, as well as the approximate amount of time that it would take to teach that if you were teaching a math class, right? So if you did that entire unit and you had a dedicated math class. So the reason I'm pointing that out is because they are pretty substantial. They take a long time, and we just need to keep that in mind whenever we're planning our outcomes teaching math at this level. So take a couple of minutes to look through that scope and sequence document. And what I want you to answer in the chat when you've had a chance to look at it is, how is this similar or different from other math curricula or other math materials that you may have used with beginning students? Right, I see some responses that a lot of people are also agreeing with. So Martha said it's more thinking oriented. It does not jump to procedures. The differences are it's more comprehensive, there's longer units, it's remote ready, more problem solving, less memorization. And that is a really important point because many times folks who struggle to understand math at an early level, they may have had to rely on some memorization as the only tool they had. But memorizing things that you don't understand doesn't make for good long-term use. And it also means they may have difficulty applying it. So we're really trying to address that gap and make sure people understand these basic operations so they can use them and be successful moving forward. Someone mentioned real world situations, more understanding, takes much more time to work on one concept than anything I've used. And that is probably true if you've never had a curriculum that was specifically designed for this level of student. But if we're comparing to how long it takes students in K-12 to learn these same concepts, and those students may not have learning disabilities, they're still getting less time than kids would get. But of course, with adults, we always have less time. But it really takes a long time to build some of these foundational concepts. So for adults that didn't have that opportunity when they were kids, it's going to take time. And trying to speed things up often can create anxiety. So it typically is better to cut back on what you're trying to accomplish and just do it really well. That's my general approach to things. Yep, so Mark mentioned the multiplication includes certain things that some textbooks save for later. So there's a lot of, at this beginning level, you may have noticed there's not anything that looks like formal algebra in the sense that we're not working with variables, we're not solving equations or anything like that. But we are building a lot of that algebraic thinking. So even at a basic level, we can have students writing expressions, writing equations, understanding properties of operations, and they're just doing that with whole numbers and in ways that make sense at that level. Remote ready. Oh, someone pointed out it's in Spanish and English. Thank you for pointing that out because I forgot. All of the materials have been translated, so they're available in both languages. Okay, real world. Great. There's so many of you, which is fantastic. I'm kind of just looking through and seeing if there's anything that I didn't mention because a lot of people are agreeing with each other. Excellent. Okay, so what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to show you the structure so you know what's there and how to access it, and then we'll actually jump into trying some of the math. So we call these packets because there literally is a student packet for each topic. And part of that is to make it easier to use remotely for folks who have a remote classroom. But in each student packet, they're broken into 3 to 5 units. And each unit's going to contain conceptual activities, practice sheets, an application activity, which it's going to be in a certain topic like financial literacy, civics, etc. There's optional language support, warm-up routines, there's a student self-evaluation, and there's an exit ticket for formative assessment. So that's sort of the minimum that's included in each unit. Additionally, some units have other tests, evaluations, projects, things like that. I wanted to show you an example of one of the application activities, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Now, in Massachusetts, we've been doing a lot with the teaching skills that matter. So that's why that mentions that here. But other states, you may have different initiatives around, how you're doing application and real life skills. But here's an example of a financial literacy problem. This comes from the division packet, where students are given a scenario, a financial scenario, that could be solved in a lot of different ways. There isn't one solution. And so students are asked to sort of brainstorm what are some options that this person has, and then to think about the pros and the cons of each option. And then they discuss it as a class, and they can talk about what they might decide to do. So giving people some practice, really not just with the math itself, but also like thinking about a mathematical activity in a real life sort of problem solving way. And when I've done this with my beginning students, a lot of them they really hadn't necessarily broken down a problem like that before. They hadn't necessarily made a pros and cons list before. That was new to some people. So it was kind of exciting to see that, like, oh, this was a really valuable activity for them to kind of work through that process. I was just looking quickly at the chat box, and I know, Mark, you're kind of watching it. Is there anything that people mentioned that I really missed? Okay, Lindsay mentioned that you folks have some standards, ACES, TIF standards that are similar to TS2TM. Okay, thank you for translating that for me. Great. Okay, great. In addition to the student packet, each packet also has a teacher's guide. So I know all the acronyms, right? The teacher's guide is going to contain standards for each section. It's going to contain a math background to help the teacher know, because people can use this who aren't necessarily math teachers. What are students supposed to be understanding? How does it go together? Facilitation instructions. There's vocabulary lists. There's things to watch for, which is what came up in pilot teaching. And then there are math routines. And I do want to talk a little bit about math routines because they are really important, especially at this beginning level. I use math routines with all levels of math that I teach, but one of the values of a math routine is that it's an activity of some type where the instructions for the activity and the expectations of what kind of response you're looking for stays the same, but the content can change, right? And the value of this, especially for folks with learning challenges of any kind, is they create predictability. So that can really lower some of the anxiety, some of the, I'm not quite sure what they want me to do. And especially after students have done a routine multiple times, they know what the instructions are. They know what you're expecting of them. That frees up a lot of working memory, so that they don't have to get stuck on trying to understand what what do you want me to do in this activity, right? And especially for folks who may struggle with some of that, right? Sometimes just figuring out what the activity is uses up so much energy that they don't have a lot left to really attack the math. But once they've learned, for example, how to do an open middle, they see another one and they go, oh, okay, I've done this. I know what's expected, and they can just really get started on the content. So there are a number of different routines. None of these are unique to BeCALM. These are all math routines that can be found online or that math teachers use. But when we developed BeCALM, what we did was we chose ones and matched them up with the content in each unit so that the routine that's repeated throughout that unit is also practicing the content that's relevant. So they're already built in. You don't have to create them. They're included. And they're either included right in the student packets or they're included as a downloadable PDF. And I'm going to very quickly show folks the website itself, just so you can see where to download, where to access all of these. Hold on, I was just trying to get to my correct website so I can share the screen. Okay. All right, so this is what the BeCALM website looks like. This is the same website link that Mark put in the chat earlier. If you go to the curriculum tab, okay, what you're going to see here, aside from a picture that's obviously dated to the pandemic, you scroll down, you're going to see the scope and sequence document and the crosswalk that you just looked at, but you're also going to find all the units. And if you click on any one of these units, right, here's where you're going to find all the materials. So all of this is freely available. You've got your teacher's guide, your student packet, and any instructional slides that are needed, as well as the Spanish versions of those. Okay, so that's where you find everything. There's also a few other things on this website, like some frequently asked questions and some contact information. So it's a good place to look if you are looking for more information. Okay. I'm going to pause for a moment in case anyone has questions related to the structure of the curriculum itself before we start doing more math activities. I'm also just checking my time. Okay. Yep. So I'm just pausing for a moment in case anyone has questions they want to ask. You're welcome to put those in the chat. So Chris asked, could you show some instructional slides from BeCALM just as an example? That's actually what we're going to do like right now. We're going to try some of the activities. So all the things we're about to do are coming from specific units. Mark mentioned 2 truths and a lie. Yeah, I love 2 truths and a lie. If you haven't played 2 truths and a lie, it's a routine that involves having 2 true statements and one that's false, and students have to figure out which one's false. So it can be used for almost anything, but the ones here might be practicing how to write equations properly or how to use mathematical grammar properly. Okay, Tracy asked a really interesting question. How long do you expect it would take a student to go through the first 4 basic modules? It says on here that they are estimated to be about 48 hours of class time each. I will tell you, for me, I get through about 2 of those basic modules and maybe 1 of the additional ones in 1 school year. And I meet with my students 4 hours a week. So to do the entire BeCALM takes me about 2 years. And that is a specific math class that I'm teaching that's for folks at that level. In terms of how long units take, what class lengths are assumed, well, it's kind of estimated by hours of class time, so that might be broken up differently. And I know not everyone here necessarily has a dedicated math class, but I like to mention that just to give you perspective, because sometimes teachers are asked to sort of do everything in amounts of time that are just not realistic for what it really takes. I've been working with folks at this level for almost 15 years, and this is the amount of time it takes if you really have students who need this level of instruction. Yeah. A lot of times when people are coming up with time estimates, they're picturing folks that are actually at a much higher level, and they think, oh, maybe they need a quick review of this or that. But we do have adults who need this as instruction. and it takes a long time. Great. Okay, I will pause again at the end in case there's more questions that come up, but I do want to look at some concrete examples so you can get a sense for more of these. So the first one we're going to look at comes from the Operation Sense packet, and this is a unit called our Base 10 system, and the activity is called Cashing a Paycheck. I just did this with my students about a month ago. So first I'm going to have you all try the math. You have a paycheck for $328. Your task is to find 3 different ways you could take your money, but you only get to use $100, $10, or $1 bills. Okay? So you can put your responses in the chat, but think about different ways you could pay that out. Nice. So I'm seeing in the chat a lot of different ways that people are paying it out. Some people also kind of did sort of a maximum and minimum in terms of how many bills it would take, right? So we could take it all in ones if we wanted to, but there's a lot of ways we could use larger groups. Excellent. So I wanted you to try that first because now I'm going to show you a short video of some students solving this problem. Video's only a couple of minutes. So let me make sure I share my screen properly. And you will see, actually, because a lot of these units were first developed during the pandemic, this is from a remote classroom. Okay.
Did I write it right, Melissa?
You did.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that is one example in the chat. And I'm also going to put under it how we would like say that, how we would interpret this. This would be like $300 bills, 300s, 2 10s, and 8 1s. So that's one way we can make this amount. Here's another suggestion. Make this bigger. We could make the same amount, but we could break those hundreds up into tens. So that would give us 32 tens plus 8 ones. Okay. So the 30 tens makes the 300. The 2 tens makes the 20, and then the 8 ones.
Yep.
Okay, that's another way. So the way we would read this is 32 tens and 8 ones. What if this bank had no $10 bills? Is there a way that we could still pay this amount?
Yes.
How would you pay it if you had no tens?
$328 $1 bills.
That's one way, right? If you don't mind a stack of bills, you could make this amount all in ones. Right? Any other ways that we could do it?
Yeah, we can pay it into.
Go ahead.
300 one. Oh, wait a minute. Into I said okay. 1 time on 2 time 150. 60. 2 time 160. And you can 2 time $8.
Okay, so you had
2 time 150, 120.
200s, 260s, and 8.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have 60 groups of 60 for this, but the numbers do work out. So what we could think about is the 2 groups of 60 would make $120, right? How could you make $120 with tens?
6 10 and 50 60, yeah, 60 6 12 10.
Yeah, 12 tens. So I'm going to replace the 2 groups of 60 with 12 groups of 10 because now you've built it using only hundreds, tens, and ones.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a good example because sometimes if you were at the bank, you may not want 32 tens, but you may want like more than 2 tens. You might be like, oh, tens are kind of useful. Why don't you give me $200 bills, 12 tens, and the 8 ones? So you're kind of doing a little bit of each, and that will also work. Good. Thank you for that. Okay, let me go back to the regular share, which takes me a quick second. So a couple of people were mentioning this in the chat about place value. So what do you think this activity demonstrates about the base 10 number system, about place value? Okay, so let's see. Catherine mentioned in a number like 328, there are more than just 2 tens in that number. Okay, the connections between the place values. Yep, absolutely. See, there's more things coming up. Yep. Yeah, as we're trying to build that conceptual understanding, right? We want them to see, I think Mark pointed out that flexibility that we can move value between different place values. We can group smaller things together to make larger groups. We can also break them apart. We can break apart hundreds into tens or into ones. And that type of flexibility is going to be really important when students start to do even just operations like multiplication and division with larger numbers, because that's how we do those operations. We break them apart by place value, right? Even if we're doing addition and subtraction, we're regrouping. We're breaking up tens, or we're regrouping, tens or hundreds as we're doing that. So if students don't really understand how they can move that value or how those place values are related, then those types of operations are just going to be an algorithm. They're not going to really understand how it's working. They're going to be a lot more likely to make mistakes and not know how to use it. Now, here's the other thing I want you to think about. So we said this was the approach of BeCALM, was to honor and center student thinking. Do you see, oops, sorry about that. Do you see any of these aspects in this activity?
Can you repeat your question again?
Sure. Where do you see any of these aspects, 1, 2, or 3, of the BeCALM approach in this activity? So a lot of people are saying all three, right? Not every activity has to do all three at once. Although this activity, I think, does lend itself well to multiple ways of solving a problem, because that's part of the point, that we can make the number in different ways. We are trying to develop that conceptual understanding of place value. And what's particularly nice is this one's also in a financial application, but not every activity is going to do all three at once. Now, there was another comment I just wanted to mention. I think Catherine said, most students have life experience with money, and that brings a lot of understanding already, and then is helping to connect the vocabulary and that life experience to mathematical thinking and how those two are connected. Absolutely. So, and I like that you pointed that out, is that when we're doing contextualized activities, it goes both ways. A lot of adults are bringing their own understanding to it, which helps a lot with the learning. And it also lets them connect it to something new. So you may have noticed in the video that I was, and I had taught them how to do this prior to the video, but I was putting their responses in a mathematical expression that involved parentheses, because I wanted them to see how they could write something with like mathematical punctuation, basically, to express what they already knew how to do with tens and ones and things like that. Yep, and she said you type the words, yeah, to help with the language. And there is a lot of language support built into BeCALM, both because a lot of folks at the BeCALM math level may be either at an earlier level of literacy or maybe an English language learner, or just may not have used language connected to math in that way. So there was a lot of emphasis on providing language support throughout. Marty mentioned another idea is to talk about the pros and cons of solving a problem each way, both in a real life situation, like, do you really want 300, $1 bills, right? Getting them to think practically, but also as they see different approaches to solving a math problem, they might go, ooh, I really like that one. That one feels understandable and easy to me, or maybe I don't like that one. That doesn't play to my strengths, right? So they can build their own toolkit. All right, we're going to take a look at an activity from the multiplication concepts packet. This comes from a unit called Equivalent Expressions, and it's actually a math routine called Array of the Day. And I particularly love this routine. So your task is to write an expression for the number of squares. And I really mean an expression. So I tell students, I don't just want the number. I want to see how you see the picture. So if you see equal groups, I want to see that in your expression, right? If you counted by twos, I want to see that in your expression. If you added parts together, I want to see that. So you can put in the chat an expression that shows how you counted the number of tiles. Voice is getting scratchy, so I'm just going to take a sip while you all are thinking. All right. You're welcome to keep adding more. There's a lot here, so I'm just going to pick one or two to explore. All right, so I see one here, and here's where I'm going to pull out my annotation. I think this one is from Krista, and she wrote 6 times 4 minus 4. Okay, so this is an example of how somebody saw this array. So now I'm looking for, would anyone like to volunteer to unmute themselves? See if you can explain how you think Krista saw the array. The only information you have is her expression. So again, I'm asking for a volunteer. Okay, Martha raised her hand, so go ahead and unmute yourself. How do you think Krista saw the array?
Well, so if I look at all the corners, each of those is 4, a square of 4 squares. And then in the middle, I imagine 2 more squares of 4 squares, but 2 out of each square is gone. So you have to minus out the that 4 that are missing.
So this 4,
Yeah,
the 4 that's not there. Okay.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, I didn't quite, can you say again how you saw the first part of the expression, how you think she saw the 6 times 4?
The 6 times 4, so I'll say it a little differently this time. Actually, if you if you look across the top, you can see 3 squares, each of them having 4 squares within. 3 squares composed of 4 squares each, as in the corners.
Like this?
Yes.
Okay.
And then another row of 3 on the bottom.
Ah, okay. So you kind of saw it like this?
Yeah, yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay. So like, yep. And then missing the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cool. So I'm curious, Krista, is that how you saw
No, but I really like it.
it? How did you see it, Krista?
I saw a 4 by 6, and I saw the 6 going across the top as 2 groups of 3. But I, said that was 6, and then going down 4, and then like Martha was showing the
So you saw the
missing,
whole thing.
yeah, and then missing that middle chunk, which was a grid of 4.
-4.
Yep.
So that's how you saw it. Okay, cool. So even the same expression could lead to slightly different interpretations. That's really neat. Thank you. All right, let me see. I'm going to explore one more. This one comes from, let's see, this is Jamie's. So let me put the other one up here. Sorry, I'm just messing with my little annotations here. So we have another expression that says 8 plus 4 plus 8. Okay. Would anyone like to volunteer to explain what do you think Jamie sees? How did Jamie see 8 plus 4 plus 8? So a volunteer that's not Jamie. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to speak.
I think maybe Jamie saw the 8 looking vertical, the 4 going down and 2 across.
Okay, so you're thinking like this?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yep. And then the next group
There's 8.
of 2 columns, there's 4.
Look here.
And then the last group of 2 columns has 8 again.
Okay. All right. So now I'm curious, Jamie, is that how you saw it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Great. So what do you think students are meant to get from this activity? And this is a routine, so this is something in the multiplication unit that, would be repeated. So students would have different arrays that they're writing expressions for. And when I do this routine, I always ask, at least occasionally, students to interpret each other's expressions. Okay. Okay, so people are saying there's multiple ways to get an answer. So many different answers are acceptable. We're creating equivalent expressions. And that is actually the unit that it's in. So that is part of it. Practice expression writing, flexibility with groupings. Great. Yep. This is included in the multiplication unit, partially because we want to get students started seeing equal groups and using multiplication to express that. But obviously they are going to sometimes see other operations as well. And someone mentioned too, practice expression writing. So while we're not doing formal looking algebra at the beginning level of math, writing expressions is a really important part of algebraic thinking. And a lot of times students who are at an early math level, they may not really understand why an expression can hold information. Like they're used to thinking of math as like get an answer, like do a calculation, get an answer. But when we get into higher levels of math, the expressions themselves contain a lot of important information. They contain a lot of information about how something is structured and how the different parts are related to each other. And so at this very basic level, with something very visual and concrete, with whole numbers, we want students to get practice both writing and interpreting structure through a mathematical expression. And I like that this activity gives them sort of a concrete way to visualize what's happening in different expressions. All right, so I think we just talked about this slide, which was what math concepts are explored. But lastly, I'm going to give you a minute to think about which of these parts of the BeCALM approach do you see in this activity? Okay, so people are saying 1, maybe 1 and 2, right? This one is abstract. It does not have an application, which is okay. Not every activity has to do everything. But it really gives us a lot of value to multiple ways of solving a problem. And helping students connect expressions with concrete models, like things they can see, is helping with developing that conceptual understanding of the operations as well, like seeing the multiplication as the repeated groups, or even seeing the subtraction as the piece that gets removed, for example. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. We have one more activity we're going to do. So this last one comes from division concepts, and this is from the final application project, which involves doing some measurement stations. So here is one of the measurement stations. So the task is to give Marta's height and arm span in feet and inches. So it's given in just inches, okay? Now, because we're going to keep this at the level of the beginning math students that we're working with, I want to ask you to think about different ways you could solve this, and calculators are okay. But not using long division, because we don't specifically teach long division at the beginner level. We really want students to understand what division is with smaller numbers first. Okay, so think about some ways that somebody might solve this, assuming they can't use long division. All right, so I see a bunch of different strategies. I'm going to show some examples of strategies, and you're going to see a lot of the things you mentioned in the chat showing up here. This project comes at the end of the division unit, where students spend some time learning about both division as breaking into a certain number of groups, and then also division as asking, for example, how many 12s can we get out of 68, for example, which is how we think about measurement units. So some possible strategies that students might use, right? Some of you mentioned counting up by 12 or like a repeated addition strategy. But of course, this is a situation where it doesn't divide evenly. So we have to be able to interpret that remainder and both to find that remainder and interpret it. Okay. People also mentioned things like repeated subtraction, right? How many groups of 12 can I take out? Now, even though both of these strategies, repeated addition and repeated subtraction, they don't specifically use a division sign, they do show an understanding of sort of what division is. We're asking the question, how many groups can we get, right? So we're trying to build that understanding of what division is so that if they, for example, if they punched it into a calculator, they would need to understand what the calculator is actually doing. Now, some students may be more familiar with multiplication. They could use multiplication to get themselves close. Right? And what's really interesting, so I do let students use the calculator for these activities because there's always a remainder. And if they're going to use the calculator, they need to be able to interpret what's happening, right? So the thing is, and at this level, we don't teach like decimals to the hundredths. In the BeCALM curriculum, it only goes to teaching like 0.5 and 0.50 as half. So students generally, they're not really going to know what to do with this 0.67. If they're going to use a calculator, they need to understand what the whole number part is telling them, that they can fit 5 groups of 12 and 68, and there's going to be some left over. And then they can use that to figure out, like, turn it around, right? So let's say a student did this. They used the calculator to get the 5. Then they said, okay, that means I got 5 groups of 12 equals 60, and there's 8 more. That student actually has a really good understanding of division. And in order to accomplish it, they used division, they used multiplication, they used subtraction. Almost any operation you can think of can be part of this solution. Okay. And if you think about what we actually do when we do long division or when we do an algorithm, what we are doing is some combination of finding, like multiplying to get close and then subtracting and then multiplying to get close and then subtracting. We're just doing these steps over and over. Division really becomes a combination of using the other operations in a certain way. Okay. All right, so how do you see, what parts of the BeCALM approach do you see in this activity? Okay. Yeah, this one may have aspects of all three. This one does have an application involved. I think I saw in the chat also someone was mentioning doing this with minutes and hours, and part of the measurement stations involves translating minutes into minutes and hours with like movie times. And I think there's another one about birth weights and translating ounces into ounces and pounds. So just using those common types of measurement units that come up. All right, so we're getting close to the end of our time. So I just wanted to mention that, if you're curious to learn more, there once again is the website where you can get all the materials, but there's also some like frequently asked questions and more information there. This is my email. You're welcome to email me with questions about BeCALM or either the curriculum itself or how it works in my classroom, or if you've tried something, tell me about how it goes. I'm really curious about that. And I believe my email's on the last page as well. So this is also the information if you're curious to contact our Adult Numeracy Center, which is the part of TERC that hosts all of our adult numeracy work. This is their website and email. Okay. All right, so thank you so much, everyone. I can stay on for a few minutes if anyone has specific questions, but Lindsay, I don't know how quickly you have to cut it off for the next session. So anyway, thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I can keep this room open for a few minutes longer. I have
Okay.
2 links going in the chat. One is if you want to continue your numeracy journey, one next step you could take is applying for the Teaching Numeracy to Adults cohort. The information is in the chat. And you have the opportunity to receive graduate credit for doing that. And then the flyer to the program today so that you can navigate to your next session. But otherwise, I'll stop the recording now, but we can hang out for a few minutes. I have to stop at about 2:05. But thank you, Melissa. This was great.
Sure.